I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. ESPN's Emmy Award-winning Darren Rovell is on the show today. He's a sports journalist legend, especially on Twitter. With a following of more than 2 million people and counting, he shares his polarizing personality and snackable sports content all day, every day. You'll understand why even he considers himself polarizing when you listen to this episode. He's a sports business analyst for ESPN, and he's known for sharing stats and facts that you didn't know you wanted to know until he tells you them. The guy is a numbers wizard. His work ethic, consistency, and mind are unmatched. I've known him for almost a decade now, and I can't wait for you to get to know him if you don't already. And in this episode, you'll learn a lot. It's not just for sports fans. Darren's life journey and operating system are valuable to all of us. I've had listeners ask me to share a little more about myself and how I went from living in a trailer home in Wyoming to working in pro sports, becoming an entrepreneur, writing a best-selling book, living on a boat, and now doing this podcast from the forest. Let's zoom in on my first few years in professional sports. In 2005, I started working in the NBA for the Phoenix Suns. And I was working in partnerships and eventually convinced the leadership of the team to create a role called the Director of New Media and Research. And I lobbied for this role, and they gave it to me. So this was back in the day when we called things new media, not social media, not digital media, but it was just new. So that was my title. And I started to experiment. I started to play around on Twitter and better understand how I could use social media and how the team and the players could actually use these new communication channels to talk to fans, to talk to one another, and just share what they were thinking, to kind of show the person behind the personality. That was all fun, and I was experimenting, and one day I got this phone call. It was basketball operations calling me, and they said, can you come down to the locker room right now because Shaquille O'Neal wants to learn how to tweet. And we've asked around, and you're the only person in this building that really knows what that means. And they didn't know what it was called. They kept saying, is it Twitter, all the names at that point. It was a time when everybody laughed at this thing called Twitter, and it was this blue bird. And mainstream media hadn't really picked up on Twitter yet. So I go down, and I meet 7-foot-tall Shaquille O'Neal. I look up to him, and he immediately hands me his Shackberry at the time. He had a BlackBerry, which he called a Shackberry, because everything around Shaquille O'Neal has some sort of funny phrase. In fact, he was the Shaqtus in Phoenix when he transferred over to Phoenix. So I showed him a couple of things, and we became buddies. We started to work together and banter back and forth on what he could do with this new space. And this was a time when really there weren't any celebrities on Twitter yet, maybe a few, but very limited. This was before the election in 2008 when President Obama really put Twitter on the map. And we found a bit of a problem one day. This was that fans didn't believe it was Shaquille O'Neal behind his own tweets. They didn't believe that it was his voice and him actually doing the tweeting. So a couple things happened next. I took him this idea called random acts of Shaqness, completely making this concept up, and I suggested that we do things like have him stand on the street corner and tweet his exact whereabouts, so fans would then know where he is, come up to him in person in the physical world, not just the virtual world, and we could take photos and they could meet him, and maybe the first person to tag him would get tickets to the game the next night. And so he was game to do this, and Shaquille O'Neal has zero ability to fake anything. He is larger than life, literally, and he's quite amazing. So taking on that idea and starting to bridge the virtual world and the physical world, people believed it was him because networks like ESPN would then pick up the footage that we captured and they would repurpose all of this on TV. So we were starting to kind of make a big splash with these experiments, these random acts of Shaqness. Well, also in getting in touch with Twitter, who I think had 11 employees at the time, and letting them know there was this problem. We had imposters too, people pretending to be Shaquille O'Neal on Twitter, and some of them were hilarious and really good, but they didn't quite have his voice down. So they decided to create a little blue check mark, a verification symbol, in response to this, and also there were other imposters for other high-profile people. So they give him a blue check mark, and he was, if not the first, one of the very, very first. And they gave me one too for my personal Twitter account because I was working with him so closely and because we were bantering back and forth all the time. Fast forward, and a lot started happening. There were no rules for the space, and the NBA league office starts calling into Phoenix to the team and saying, what are you doing down there in Phoenix with this social media stuff? We don't have rules yet. You need to hold up and wait until we can get some rules mapped out in the handbook and have some guidelines. So they basically kind of tried to put me in Twitter timeout, but this train had left the building, and at this point, my own personal following had grown too, and the things that we were doing, Shaquille O'Neal and I, we were starting to make big news. Like the New York Times did an article, and it was pretty normal for ESPN to cover these shenanigans or Shaqnanigans. I just made that up, so I'm feeling kind of proud of myself. They were really getting used to covering these things, and we started doing more experiments, and before you know it, there were a lot of other celebrities that started to join in and have fun. One of the things that I loved about this time in my life was realizing everybody has a voice. And with these communication tools, really value rises to the top. So it's the equal opportunity space. Here I am, this girl from Wyoming who never even imagined she'd be driving on freeways that's now living in Phoenix, Arizona, and has almost 1 million people following me at the time. So, and maybe it was a little less at that point, but it was growing so quickly that voices mattered. And so if we think about people speaking up right now and sharing their thoughts and how this is being done without these social media communication channels, it wouldn't be possible. And we're seeing huge paradigm shifts. We're seeing amazing progress on many fronts, and it can be attributed to these communication channels. Back to the story and how Darren Rovell comes into this. He was so early on the scene with social media that he started to notice, of course, what Shaquille O'Neal was doing, but he also started writing articles about it. And eventually, Shaquille decided to retire. When he decided to retire, we decided it would be awesome if he just did this through social media and he told the fans first. So there wasn't a press release. This defied all protocol or traditional ways of professional athletes, superstars, retiring. And he decided to just do it himself through his social media presence. So I'm in Orlando at Shaquille's house, and we record this quick video of him telling fans that he felt that they deserved to know first that he's about to retire. We share this, and Within moments, of course, Darren Rovell has picked up the story. Then we walk into Shaquille's kitchen, and within about 5 minutes, what he shared through a click of a button online had made its way to breaking news on ESPN and other channels, and it became a worldwide trending topic. And that day really was a landmark day, not only in my career, but I think for media, for sports, for news, because he became the media that day. He leapfrogged the traditional channels. He leapfrogged those microphones. He leapfrogged the old way of doing things and innovated a completely new way, created and changed the game. So that's a bit of a glimpse into how I met Darren Rovell. And also, the name of my first book was Renegades Write the Rules, because there were no rules. And eventually, I started my first company, and Shaquille O'Neal was my first client. Before we get started, I want to tell you about my partners at Design Pickle. You know when you're in a pickle because you need a design, but you don't have the time or maybe even the skill to do it yourself. Many of us have been there. Design Pickle has been a lifesaver for me. Here's how they're set up. You pay a flat rate monthly fee, and you're given a dedicated designer for all of your needs. You heard that right. Unlimited graphic designs, unlimited requests, and the first 14 days are risk-free. You get a full refund if you cancel in the first 2 weeks. Why Not Now listeners like yourself get 30% off their first month. You can go to designpickle.com/why not now to redeem the offer. For me, the process has been painless and ego-free. In fact, many of the posts you're seeing on my social media channels were created by my buddies at Design Pickle, specifically Jacob at Design Pickle. That's what's cool, is that you get a dedicated designer. I'm on a first-name basis with my designer. A mentor once said to me, just because you can doesn't always mean you should. Do what you're uniquely qualified to do. Design Pickle helps me do just that. Go to designpickle.com/why not now to redeem the offer. We tackle the most taboo topics on the Why Not Now show. Oftentimes, you're hearing guests share things they've never shared before. In the spirit of things we don't typically talk about, you should know that the Why Not Now show is supported by Poopery. Yep, the original before you go toilet spray. It's magic. My friends at Poopery have literally taken the smell out of you know what. This pure blend of essential oils stops bathroom odor before it begins. Visit poopery.com, and Why Not Now listeners get 20% off with code Why Not Now. That's all one word. Also, you can now get Poopery at Target. Darren, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Amy.
Absolutely. I have a lot of things I'd love to catch up with you on, but in the spirit of Why Not Now, let's hop right in. Can you tell me about a time when you had to ask yourself, why not now? And we'll talk it through, dissect that moment, hour, day, and see what we can glean from it.
It's probably in June of 2006. I had been at ESPN for 6 years. And I had gone on CNBC as a contributor a couple times, and I think it had gone well, including getting in a fight on air with one of the hosts over one of the opinions that he had. And they had approached me, do you want to leave ESPN? And, in some sense, I was there for 6 years since I was 22 years old, and it was comfortable. And in another sense, there was, leaving. And I had to think about, if I left ESPN, would I ever want to get back? And if I did, would leaving preclude me from getting back? And I mean, just the way it turned out, it was a little bit more of a risk than it would be today, because in 2006, Twitter wasn't there. So I didn't have my own baked-in audience or social really wasn't there. And so it meant that I would not be carrying people who followed me all the way to CNBC. And as it turned out, I did one contract deal with CNBC that lasted to 2009. And then, that's really where social media started picking up, and I could develop a brand. And then 2012 just came perfectly back to me, and I felt like it was right to come back. So I made those risks, leaving CNBC, coming back to ESPN. And while it wasn't, overtly to get it right, it was right because I think I left at the right time and I came back at the right time.
So in that decision in 2006, how did you make that decision? Was there a moment when you decided, okay, that's it, I'm going to burn my boats and go ahead and head over to CNBC? Do you remember the distinct time when you made that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I liked the idea of, I was enthralled with covering the Olympics. I liked the idea of being on TV every single day. I liked the idea of being the only sports guy there. So going to CNBC meant, doing an Olympics in Beijing and doing an Olympics in Vancouver. And at ESPN, that opportunity really wasn't there because they're not the official rights holder. So I thought about that. And then the idea of just being on TV every day and being my own boss and, being able to put on whatever I wanted for CNBC's goal, which was to have traders and anyone watching CNBC push up the volume, because there was a epidemic of, hey, we'll just watch CNBC, no volume, and just look at the ticker. And obviously, that becomes a problem when you're presenting to advertisers if that's the reputation. And they saw sports and me as a chance to change those attitudes. And so that was really exciting.
And are you more of a pro and con list type of guy, or are you more gut intuition? And I think I know the answer to this.
I'm like a Ruben Pfeffer risk assessor type of guy. I mean, I'm like, I like punch it into the calculator.
I thought so. Knowing your stats and your analytical sense.
Yeah. I'm definitely not I don't think I've made many decisions, with my gut throughout my career. But it seemed right, and financially it was okay. It wasn't a risk financially, but it was, again, I mean, if you think about it now, and you wonder, if I left in 2012, let's say, and that would be, I would have had maybe 150, 200,000 Twitter followers, and I would have been able to bring, I did fall off the face of the earth for some people. And, now that wouldn't be possible, but back then I did.
And I want to get to that because we first met because of social media, and I'd say you and I were on the front line really navigating this crazy new territory. But real quick, back to the calculator guy. So when you make decisions, Darren, do you really have a spreadsheet? Do you, as an analytical kind of guru, stats guy, do you write things down? How do you navigate that?
I definitely write things down. I talk it out. I do a lot of talking out with the people who I most respect. I remember talking it out with my wife, talking it out with my brother, my parents, certainly a couple messiahs in the business, media people that I met who I respected. It's not really a spreadsheet. I'm not getting into the Excel document, but I would say most people would consider it's very calculated.
Yeah. Yeah, gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. And let's talk about social a little bit. We first met, I'm not even sure what the first situation was. Maybe it was with Shaquille O'Neal when I was still working for the Phoenix Suns and we were doing our
probably
random acts of Shaqness or whatever. But I'd say you have harnessed the space the best, in my professional opinion, looking at not just as a journalist, but as, you've built your brand. And as you say, your following now it's transferable. You can take it to different places with you and diversify it. And so with social, a lot has changed in the last nearly decade since we first met. I mean, the algorithms have changed, the audiences, the content, the way you report, but you've kept with it. And when I look at your following, especially on Twitter, because that's your bread and butter, right? You have been able to keep that algorithm on fire and keep your audience engaged. How would you say you've been able to keep with all of the changes that us as humans have gone through, but also the platforms over the last 10 years? Has it just been consistency, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I made my bet on Twitter. I always, from early on, and I'm sure you were on before me, so I'm sure you got the whole, well, why do I need to know what you're having for lunch thing, where people would bash it like they've never bashed something that they've never tried before. And I always got the question, well, what happens if Twitter isn't the next big thing? And I always answered, well, then I'll go to the next big thing. And I think I probably suffered by being late to Instagram, which I now regret, because I was so hardcore into Twitter. But I made my bet. I didn't spread. I think a lot of people in the beginning spread themselves out, and maybe unless you're Gary Vee, that I don't know if that was the best bet. But I bet that Twitter was unlike any other social media in that it was most important to journalism and finding out what was going to happen in the world. And I made the bet that that wasn't going to change. I also, even as the medium changed, I would say there's one thing that I never changed, which was who I am and where I fit. And, the key here is, where do you fit? How are you a niche? Why do you offer something? I think there's a burden of responsibility when someone chooses to follow you. And I take that seriously. I've always taken that seriously. I've also taken the fact that just because it takes 30 seconds to tweet doesn't mean you should. So if I felt that if I could serve a niche that people felt like they had to follow me or they would be missing something if they didn't follow me, and I tweeted out the right things at the right time. Timing has always been a thing that I feel like I've understood. Then I think I would be, one of the most popular follows. And I think that's held true. I also think that I've understood that Twitter is a separate medium than writing or being on the radio or doing a podcast or doing TV. And so I work differently on Twitter. And I prepare for the national championship game, have 50 tweets lined up, and, they're heavily researched, and, they come up in between commercials, and everything is very strategic, and that hasn't changed.
Well, and that's actually one of the questions I had for you. So the volume and the pace is so intense, and it's fair to say, yes, you are one of the most popular follows. It's proof in your numbers. 2 million followers on Twitter, and your engagement's very strong. So when you are just on any given day, or if you have something like today or a big event coming, do you have help in planning your content? Do you have a stats researcher? Where do you get all of this information? And then clearly you just mentioned you prepare, so it's ready to go. But just from a gathering, sourcing standpoint.
So from a gathering standpoint, so I've written every one of my tweets, which is like 134,000. It's a little uneasy to say that number. And, research, I've purchased over 5,000 old magazines that I go through, a week before. So history has been important to me, and I think people like it. I mean, I over-index in the 28 to 45 range, and I put out old stuff from 1989 to 1999 that people go nuts over. So that's been successful. I do have one person who is basically on Twitter for me 24 hours a day. In terms of maybe a year and a half ago, I had, can we stop there because ESPN News Desk is calling me and I got to take this, and then I'll call you right back?
Sure, you got it.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Yep, so that just happened. I'm giving you a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes. You can see how these interviews go down sometimes. So it wasn't very long until he called me right back.
They wanted me to work on a story, but I can work on a story while we're talking for a little bit. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll keep it brief here. So I guess one of my main questions for you, Darren, and I've seen this over the years and experienced it myself, a lot of other people experience it, is you mentioned yourself, you have your opinions and you're not afraid to share them, even back at CNBC, getting into a fight on air. And you have them on social too. So when people disagree, or when you have your trolls, what do you do?
That's an interesting one. I pick and choose my battles. Probably more over the last couple of years, I've picked and chosen my battles a little bit better. And if you realize that for some people, their goal is to incite you, then I think you have a better understanding. I think I've done a little bit better at handling that. But yes, I think that I'm a polarizing figure, and I think being where I was on social media kind of early from the journalism standpoint, I think put me in that type of position. So I think with the love comes the hate, and since it's been a gradual adjustment, I've just developed a pretty hard head for things and a better understanding about what gets out and what the goals are with people that engage you.
Yeah, valid and good answer. I think it's a dynamic situation, right? And always changing, but your following wouldn't be what it is and your engagement if it wasn't valuable to a lot of people. So I imagine focusing on that is key. And I think people just also love to sometimes give other people hard time, even if it's not in a super negative way. It's just sports and it's banter and I don't know.
Yeah, and
There's
that's
part
what
of that.
and that's why sports rules Twitter, because I think there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of like I everything's in the moment, and I part of the reason why I'm successful is because I kind of think of myself as pop-up video within the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that people are more passionate, especially like some people don't want to hear the financial side of it while they're enjoying sports. So I don't know. I take it because it's just natural. I can't believe it, but it's been almost 9 years on Twitter, and I feel like I definitely understand it better.
You should be in the Sports Twitter Hall of Fame if there is one. I bet there is. It's coming soon, I'm sure. So, just a few quick questions and we'll wrap up here. In terms of sports, you have a very macro point of view. What are the top few biggest changes you've seen in the last 5 to 10 years? And these can be bullet points because I know this is a long answer.
Twitter, for one. I think the ticketing world has certainly changed and become very volatile. I think obviously cord cutting, the fact that there's a group of people, which it wasn't foreseen maybe 10 years ago, like the millennials, who are actually okay with not watching a game live. But if they get credit, for sending a highlight to their friends or putting it on their social, that's good enough. I mean, those are the major changes that I see. There's just so much content out there. There's so much fragmentation. I think that sports leagues and journalists and everyone who's looking for a relevancy, has to fight that much harder for that relevancy. And it makes it, I think, more difficult, but it also is incumbent upon someone like me to determine what counts as relevant and quality, and then make sure that I'm part of that.
And for the people listening who've always wanted to work in sports, and right now they're asking themselves, why not now? Try to get in, try to find a way to live that dream. What's your advice to them?
I mean, I would say be direct. Don't say you want to work everywhere. You figure out as soon as you can where you want to be, who's doing the job that you're doing, and try to get under them. And it's not necessary to have a connection. A connection always helps, but there's more people who never had a connection who are successful than people who had a connection. And I think people might even work harder when they are coming from scratch. I always say offer things for free. If it's your favorite sports team, be bold enough to tell them what they're not doing quite right and how you can fix it and how you would fix it. When you send everything, make sure you send it in a box. Don't just send an email. Don't send a fax. A box. No one gets a box and throws it away. So whatever it is for priority mail, $4.20. Put something in snail mail. Make it a hard copy and have it show up on their desk and do something fun. So I think you have to work harder to break in and kick down the door. But I think there's ways to do it that's exciting. Something that hasn't been changed in the 17 years that I've been in the business is there's a whole lot of people that want to work in sports, and they're willing to work for cheap. And in order to have a career in it and be something that, you can actually raise a family on, you have to prove that you're that good. So have the confidence to do that and try to kick down the door in unique and innovative ways. Find out where you want to go, be specific about it, be targeted about it, and then go get it.
Great advice. I agree 100% too about not having to have a connection, especially with how democratized things are with social media and access. If you have value and you're willing to offer it, it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Good advice. And some rapid fire questions here. Your all-time favorite sports interview?
My all-time favorite sports interview. Whew, that's a tough one. I mean, really anything with Shaq. He's hilarious, as you know.
Go. That's a good one.
I interviewed him a couple years ago after I gave him the nickname the Shaqtus or whatever.
Oh, yeah. When he went to Phoenix.
Because in the first interview with CNBC, I said, and he said, he goes, I'll give you 15%. And so then I came back to him like 10 years later and said, you ought to give me 15%. He said, see, but it was this much money, but then you had to divide it by 2 and then this and that. And you know what that equals? 0. Oh. So, he's, you know him, and he's incredible, and I love him. So
yes. And just to tag along on the Shaquille stories. So I remember being at his house the day that he decided to retire over social media. And I knew you were so on the ball and you would be on it in terms of covering this because you were there and you were in these channels. So we are sitting there in Orlando, record this video of him, and he announces his retirement, share it on Twitter and tout and everywhere else. And then I said, we have to DM Darren Rovell to make sure he gets this first because he deserves it. And not only that, you were already on it. And within minutes, we walk into his kitchen and there it is on ESPN. And it was such a moment of, wow, this world is changing. And
crazy.
Yeah, it was quite the interesting just landmark. So hardest working athlete in sports?
I've seen it close up, so I used to probably think Steve Nash. I'm not really going the Phoenix Suns route.
I'm not either, but that would be my answer.
I used to think Steve Nash, but now I say maybe J.J. Watt, and certainly with his recovery back, to see how hard he works.
Yeah, and just in general, what he's done on social.
Oh, amazing.
Amazing. And if we take the title away, your affiliation with ESPN, with Twitter, who are you?
I think I'm a guy who reports on things that you didn't think you wanted to know, but when you saw it, you realized you did.
There you go. What keeps you up at night?
Someone replacing me.
Oh, ooh, that's good for a competitive sports
I wake up every morning with I am driven by fear. It doesn't cripple me, but it motivates me.
Wow. There's the takeaway. And last question, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would say I don't have any regrets. So I don't have any regrets about any of the moves I've made. So that's a very hard question for me. I know that sounds pretty crazy, but the hours that I spent instead of partying in college and spent in the radio station, I don't regret any of that. I'm actually pretty comfortable with my life so far, so I don't really have any advice to my younger self that was my younger self.
Fair enough. That's not a bad thing at all.
Maybe even though I said I wake up worrying about who's going to steal my job, maybe worry less about that. Spend more, try to get more headspace. Only there's a negative side to that, and I think devote more headspace to kicking butt instead of worrying who's behind you.
There you go. That's a nice way to wrap things up, and I appreciate your time, Darren.
You got it. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/why not now. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Gruer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?